Hi everyone, and welcome again to my channel. Today we're going to discuss another interesting topic, and that is about perseverance, disability, and the myths of endless endurance. As you know, I have created quite some content already about disability, about effort, and about what it really means to keep going in a world that constantly tells us to keep pushing harder, and to never stop. And the more I reflect on it, the more I realize the most of what I've learned about limits, growth, and persistence didn't come from people guiding me or teaching me on how to navigate life. It came from having to figure things out on my own, and often in situations where I didn't have the luxury of ignoring what my body or mind was telling me. And as well, living with a disability means that your baseline is already different. Not in a way that's always visible to others, of course, but it does nevertheless shape every decision you make throughout your day, throughout your life, basically. So there is that constant awareness of energy, capacity, of what's possible right now, rather than what should be possible in theory. So simple things, that others might move through without a second thought require for someone with a disability tons of planning, adjustment, sometimes even restraint or giving up on whatever is needed to be done simply because there is no capacity for it. And there are also those moments when you have to stay present in your body, even when it starts to push back, and moments when you have to withdraw from the world entirely because it is too overwhelming and too chaotic and not safe. And I guess at the same time, there is often that ongoing need to keep justifying yourself, explaining yourself, to advocate for your needs, to keep repairing misunderstandings that arise from people who do not fully grasp what your experience is like. And over time, this creates a very different relationship to effort and persistence. And in a sense, one that doesn't rely on the idea of constant output, but instead of something more adaptive and sustainable. And this is where I started noticing that distinction that it feels really important, which is the entire difference between endurance and perseverance. As the world that we live in tends to glorify endurance, and this idea that strength means continuing without stopping, pushing through discomfort and working harder no matter what. But that model doesn't actually reflect how humans function, because it is built on kind of a logic that treats people more like machines than living beings. And for example, a machine can be designed to run continuously until it breaks down. Even then, it can be replaced or repaired without consideration for its experience. But humans don't work like that. We have limits that are not failures, but natural boundaries. And ignoring them doesn't lead to long-term success at all. It leads to harm, and sometimes with consequences that are irreversible for disabled people. So the idea that we should continuously keep pushing ourselves beyond those limits is not only unrealistic, but it's fundamentally incompatible with being human. And what's interesting is that people without disabilities are often able to follow this endurance-based model for longer periods of time. They can push through, override signals, and delay the consequences of overexertion. But that, in a sense, can create, temporary the illusion that things are working. But eventually, they reach the same limits. Or a sense that despite all their effort, things are no longer progressing in the way that they're expected. And when that happens, it can feel like shocking because they have been told their whole lives to that effort alone should be enough that if they just keep going, they'll eventually break through. But reality doesn't work like that. Doing more doesn't always lead to getting more or progressing. Working harder doesn't guarantee progress either. And pushing without alignment doesn't create meaningful outcomes. So, in a sense, success is shaped by many factors such as timing, context, opportunity, and sometimes pure chance. And effort is only one part of the equation. And this is exactly where disabled and non-disabled people actually meet, not at the starting point, but at the point where the system reveals its limits. And that difference is that disabled people are required to conform to those limits much earlier and much more consistently because we don't really have an option to ignore those boundaries without immediate consequences. Therefore, we cannot pretend that our capacity is infinite and we cannot sustain the illusion of pushing harder will always solve the problem. And because of that, we develop a different kind of strength, one that is not based on endurance, but on perseverance. And perseverance is not about constant motion or continuous output, but it's rather the ability to adapt, to pause when necessary, to recover, or to return again in a way that respects our limits rather than denying them. And this is a long-term relationship with effort, one that is grounded in reality instead of expectation. And because disabled people as well live within that reality every single day, they often become the first to reveal something that the broader system tries to ignore, which is that the expectations placed on people are not actually sustainable. And the standard of just pushing harder is not a universal truth. It is a demand that conflicts with the way that human beings are built and function. And as a consequence as well, disabled people are the first one to become excluded, penalized, and pushed out because they cannot conform to those expectations in the way that the system requires. But at the same time, that inability to conform makes that visible. It exposes that gap between what is expected and what is actually possible. And in that sense, simply existing as a disabled person becomes a kind of a quiet truth telling, not because it's intentional, but rather because it's unavoidable. And it challenges the very assumptions that endurance is the highest form of strength, and instead points toward a different understanding of what it means to continue. So maybe the goal is not to become better at enduring conditions that are harmful, but to question why those conditions exist in the first place. And maybe it is up to us to imagine a world where capacity is respected, where limits are understood, where rest is not treated as a failure, but as a necessary part of being a human being. And in a sense as well, perseverance is that the kind of that allows us to continue over without destroying ourselves in the process, which is not a lesser form of strength, but a more honest and sustainable one. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that that was interesting. I hope that you learned as well something new today, and take care for now.